Good evening. Supply chain cyber attacks with Professors Dale Rogers, Arizona State University, Zachary Rogers, Colorado State University, SK, sorry, but the name is complicated. Last, you can tell us how you pronounce your name. It's complicated for me. Arizona State University, PhD candidate. A recent report from the Atlantic Council brought data related to survey of supply chain attacks, and they seem the cases are increasing very fast. Is real are increasing very fast? Do we have numbers about this?
Yeah. So they're increasing very quickly, and it's for a number of reasons actually. So firms have, if you look at what happened, so everyone had to go home, and so then suddenly there was all these attacks on personal computers, and 2/3 of the attacks against like routers or what have you were possible because they weren't updated. So when you get the little thing on your computer, hey, you need to update it, and you think, oh, I have a lot open right now, I'll do it later. That was one of the main problems. And so about, I think it was 30 to 40% of all attacks had been just on unupdated routers. And we had problems with Citrix, we've had problems with Palo Alto, we've had problems with F5, all of the sort of big VPNs and load balancers all have a lot of vulnerabilities. So what happens? So we have all these attacks on people, and then we start to so we'll bring more of the data inside the country, all right? Instead of you having it on your, or inside the company, instead of you having it on your computer, we'll bring it internally and you sign in with the VPN. Well, then the attacks on the VPNs go way up. And SK, I think, probably has some more exact numbers about that, right?
Yeah, well, basically what we did was collecting all the incident articles reported on news media, and we have gotten like more than 1,600 articles during the COVID-19 period and even before COVID-19 period. So we covered about 8 months of the time window, and we found that there was like 30% increase in cybersecurity attacks during COVID-19 pandemic situation. The number is very surprising for me because we don't see that such a big increase in the previous history. So it's we are living in the age of cybersecurity attack.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned 8-month window, and the previous numbers you mentioned. Which number of the previous numbers of attacks?
Yeah, each data has some limitation. For example, we don't really see entire cybersecurity attacks. But this we can rely on some reliable data sources. One of the data we know is called Hegnageddon. There's one guy collecting all the news articles about cybersecurity events. And from that kind of official database, we collected all the news articles related to all the incidents. And we covered 4 months before COVID-19 and 4 months after the first break of COVID-19. And we found that compared to 4 months before COVID-19, we see 30% more cybersecurity events these days.
Yeah, Dale, considering the entire supply chain, the upstream and downstream parts, which are more, let's say, sensible for this kind of attacks?
Well, the more upstream would be sensible. If you think about big companies like, say, Petrobras, where you used to work, Petrobras is probably got great defenses, but the way, if you wanted to hack Petrobras, you would probably want to do it is you'd come in through their supply base, and you'd come in through a small supplier who was vulnerable, and then Petrobras, because they're buying from this small supplier, Petrobras lets them in. I mean, Zach has some examples of that happening in the U.S. and so you attack the weaker, the weaker parts of the supply chain upstream, and then you can maybe move into the larger companies where there's great riches to plunder, truthfully.
And it's expanded now. So the attacks on supply bases, that's been going on for a while. What's new now is that you can kind of think about a company's data and the network that it moves through. And so pre-pandemic, most of a company's data was either inside their company right, on their servers in their buildings, moving to suppliers maybe on a few cloud services, but that was it. And every computer that was in that building was updated. Every worker was trained. Everything should have been good. Well, now when people go home, now the network, that virtual network that the data is stored in, is expanded. And so now we have these additional nodes. And now it's not just me on my work laptop at home. It's me on my unprotected iPad going through my unupdated router at my house. And suddenly there's a lot more vulnerabilities. And so in the data SK and I have been analyzing, you see a big spike in attacks on at-home workers in like late March, early April. After that, you start to see the attacks on infrastructure services. So now it's interesting because it's sort of upstream suppliers, but it's also connective suppliers. So it's just like, for instance, we're connecting on Zoom right now. There's been a lot of attacks on Zoom. There's been attacks on Google connections or the Palo Alto routers. And the Palo Alto routers are very popular for business to business transactions. And so basically what attackers do is they try to find the weak point. And previously, weak points had been like suppliers. So I told this story, I know, a few times ago when I was on here, but when Target got attacked, it was through a small air conditioning supplier called Fazio in like West Virginia, 125 people. They had the free version of Norton antivirus. They stole my credit card, made problems for me at my house because they opened up dating sites. It was a bad night for me. But so now we've kind of, we see more weaknesses. So now weaknesses are you on your computer at your house. Or maybe, something like Zoom, which, I don't know how many people were having 5 Zoom calls a day a year ago, but it wasn't very many. And now it's everybody. And so we have all of this infrastructure that was designed for one thing, and now it's way overloaded. And so that creates additional vulnerabilities that attackers are able to go into and try to pluck out information.
Well,
This is interesting, SK, because considering the oil, let's say, value chain, you have the first tier providers, the normally very strong ones, Schlumberger, Halliburton, SBM. So they have their own vulnerabilities, but they contact the main company, the oil company, in a very, let's see, invasive way. So they operate some equipment, some services. So this can be very vulnerable, no? I mean, the first tier providers connect to the mainstream.
Yeah, the vulnerability landscape is somewhat not so complete for the first tier suppliers or even for the focal companies, because we don't know entire supply chain sometimes. Okay, we don't know. I mean, so for example, one of the companies I heard about the credit card business. Well, when I heard about the number of suppliers, I couldn't believe it. Like there are like some billion or million suppliers are below the company. So, well, any point in supply base can be a vulnerability point. And the problem is, do we know every single vulnerable point? It's not that possible for FOM to scan all the vulnerability within the supply chain. Okay, there's a big question nowadays whether we can really prevent every single attack versus can we really see what's coming next and prevent any kind of preventive, I would say, preventing the future moves from the attackers. Eventually, attackers see emerging technological trends in the cybersecurity attack patterns. Also, they see opportunities from the new environment. For example, COVID-19 is a great opportunity for them because they can easily fool the employees by sending some emails like, hey, this is a COVID-19 related practice. Please download this file. And employees would be easily fooled because COVID-19 is a panicking situation for them. Okay, I don't know what this is, but I have to click this because COVID-19 is a very serious problem. So early on, let's say March, late March, and early April, the social engineering was one of the biggest issues in cybersecurity attack. But now, as Jack said, the attacks are mostly on infrastructure and supply chain. So shifting angle is one issue, and one big theme we can see from our emerging issue is that supply chain is now under attack.
Yeah,
And we
good,
don't know
good.
where it really comes from
Yeah,
sometimes.
the attacks on the people were creative too. Like they had one that was an app on your phone, and it was supposed to take your temperature. And I mean, there's no temperature sensor on your phone, but it said just hold your phone to your head, and we'll tell you if you're too hot. And if you are, then you might have COVID. But it would say 98 degrees Fahrenheit every time, but it would also steal all of the data off your phone.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so the hackers were very creative
yeah,
in the early part of the pandemic, and they were people were worried. And so they were doing things like, download the app, open up email, like SK said.
yeah. Dale, please, Dale.
Yes.
Let's see, risks we can prevent or we can deal with preventive, let's see, attitudes. But consequence just happened something wrong. How can we deal with the consequence and how consequences are let's see,
Well,
the standard of consequence we have?
it's going to be very difficult. When those guys were talking, I was thinking, one of the things we've moved to is like Internet of Things. And each one of those sensors on the Internet of Things can actually be a potential vulnerability. So now all of a sudden you have so many vulnerabilities that because you have more ways to get into your networks, and it can be quite dangerous. Something that's as simple as a light bulb, like a smart light bulb, that can actually be a vulnerable entrance into your network. And how do you police all those when you're getting hundreds new nodes on the network, and it can be quite dangerous. Zach and SK were talking about Zoom calls. I think Zachary was, and all the Zoom servers, most all of them, are in China. Do you think that China is able to crack into those things? I bet they are. And so it's a really interesting and difficult time because the nodes on a network are increasing at an exponential rate, which means that in some ways the vulnerability in your networks are also increasing at an exponential rate, and you can't keep up with all the places where attackers can hit.
Yeah, yeah, good. You mentioned something very interesting, the IoT and the OT processes, the operational, let's say, technologies process, but the connection between OT and IT, the administrative systems, they are trying to connect it to integrate those things. Maybe this is a very, let's see, weak point of the system, this connection between IT and OT. Do you agree, SK?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, sorry. Maybe you, Dale, no problem.
Maybe Jag would be more an expert on this kind of prevention, and I guess Jag has some idea about that. We were writing a paper about the what kind of things can we do when it comes to supply chain and cybersecurity. I guess that's more
Sure.
appropriate person for this.
Well, the difficulties, thanks, SK. The difficulties right now, Cavania, are that a lot of your vulnerabilities are places that you can't see. And so if we think about traditional procurement, what do? You pay attention to your most important suppliers. Like I'm sure at Petrobras, you had, okay, these are the 50, 75, these are the suppliers we care about. And these 50 suppliers are going to be 85% of our time and money and effort is here. But your vulnerabilities are all of those little suppliers, all those little the ones that you're like, yeah, what, give them the contract, with 10 minutes, we're good. That's where all the vulnerabilities are. And so it becomes difficult to patch up all those vulnerabilities because you don't have the same relationship with those suppliers. And so the suppliers usually aren't as willing to make the same investments as maybe your main suppliers are going to be because they don't know if there's a long-term contract, what's in it for me. Yet that's where your big vulnerabilities are. So that's part of it. The other thing you need to have is something called defense in depth. And luckily, a lot of firms have gotten better at this. And this is basically the idea that you don't have to have all of your very sensitive data or all your very all your financial data in the same place. And SK can attest to this. So many of the attacks we see said, oh, we got some customer data, but not financial data, right? And it's because they put it in different places. And so it's kind of like if you think about your house, you know, and an attacker gets in, right? If they get in the front door and then they can go to every single room in the house, then you're in trouble. But if you have locked doors everywhere in your house, okay, they got in the front door, but they need another key to get in the kitchen. They need another key to get in the bedroom or your office or wherever, then you have more protection. And companies have gotten much better about not only segmenting their back office systems, so it's multiple checks you have to get through, but also limiting the abilities of those small, you know, C-level suppliers to get into all those places. You don't need your C-level suppliers to have access to your point of sale system or, you know, be able to get admin capabilities or anything like that. And so companies have gotten better at sort of, just like you're saying, taking more traditional operational processes and applying them to these IT vulnerabilities.
And Dale, do we have insurance for cyber attacks, specifically for supply chain, or is not a vision for the companies to make insurance?
Wait, you mean actually buying insurance? I think you can buy insurance.
You can, but there's a limit to it. So you can have insurance, but it only goes up to a certain level usually. Like the Target attack we talked about a minute ago, they lost $195 million of customer money. Their insurance covered about 35 million of that. So they were still on the hook for like 160 million. Now, if you can be taken to court, and if the insurance company can show, you know, you guys are being negligent, you should have been able to stop this, then they can actually get out of the insurance. It's like if you crash your car, but you know your insurance company can show like, well, you know, he was you know, on cocaine and driving 300 miles an hour, we don't have to cover that, right? You can avoid that kind of thing. It's the same thing with like P.F. Chang's is the example that sticks out in my mind. Is that's a Chinese restaurant in the United States that doesn't actually really serve Chinese food, but it's Chinese. And what P.F. Chang's did was they had people you know, hacked into their point of sale system and credit cards were being stolen, but this went on for 8.5 months. And so the insurance company took them to court and said, if they were paying attention, they would have known before 8.5 months by. And so then PF Chang's wasn't covered by their insurance.
SK, people from IT area are probably, let's see, working hard to protect systems, but they are all the time very, let's see, behind to the attackers, to the hackers. How do you explain this distance, constant distance?
It's basically, I would say, competitive coevolution. It's like nature, okay? The prey and predator relationship. Predators always find a better way to capture prey, okay? And preys always try to defend their system better, and it's coevolution. The problem is the speed of evolution is so fast. For example, Zach and I were looking at the data 2 years ago, well, especially around 2012, 2011, 2013. Back then, ransomware was not an issue at all. We didn't see any single, I mean, maybe some cases, but ransomware is not a major attack type. Now, ransomware is a major type of attack. Malware is the biggest attack method these days. And how did it happen? I mean, well, they probably saw, I mean, the attackers would see, well, the traditional way wouldn't work well. Let's make something new. And then companies catch up, but with some delay. So another thing I would like to say is that there are some updates from security companies, especially from software companies. The problem is companies, I mean, so especially the consumers, as a firm, they do not really update their software on time. So there must be some gap between the time when the attackers know the vulnerability of the software and the firms update their software. At least we should narrow the time gap between the update timing and the vulnerability disclosure timing. And so firms should be really cognizant of what's happening, and they should keep their system always in a tip-top shape when it comes to vulnerability defense system-wise.
And the case of TikTok is a real, let's say, challenge for the US or for the world.
I don't know.
There is issues with the amount of data that, you know, when you click the, yeah, I accept it, TikTok does take a little more data than say Facebook or one of those social media apps. And there's a worry like, oh, what are they going to do something bad with it? At the same time, I don't think that it's anywhere on the level of the stuff that we're talking about. It's personal data, it's little things. And at the end of the day, I mean, if you want to make your little dance around videos, I say go ahead, if you're a 15-year-old kid. Now, what like it doesn't nearly rise to the level of, I mean, if you look at all of the issues with intellectual property or data theft between, say, US and Chinese companies, right? So US last year lost somewhere around $300 billion of intellectual property. A lot of that was from Chinese firms. And this has been going on for years and years, but we haven't cared about that. TikTok, on the other hand, I think because people make videos that make fun of President Trump, he's like, oh no, that one's bad. Yeah. And he's trying to get them to sell to Microsoft and maybe give him a cut and all this weird stuff that's going on. But no, TikTok, yes, there is data risk there, but I don't think it rises to the level of the data risk we see in a lot of other situations.
Yeah. No, Cavagna, I think it's one of those examples of where we're managing the minor things and not the major things. I think it's one of those things where TikTok, sure, but it's not that big of a deal. Little girls jump roping or whatever is on there. Yeah. And the much bigger deals we're not managing well at all. And it's kind of a frustrating thing to me. We're making a big deal out of what's not that big of a thing, but we're not paying attention to some of the supply chain issues, which are quite serious.
Yeah, it's like the house is on fire and we're busy reorganizing the bookshelf. Like it doesn't really make sense what we're doing.
That's right. The university are, connected to companies and the companies that are asking for help and support to prevent and to deal with the consequences in cyber attacks, or the university in this case is still, is a little bit far from the companies.
So one thing that we have an advantage of as a university is a 20,000 foot view. So we have a much more macro view of some things than maybe a company. And at Petrobras, how much attention were you paying to anybody outside of the oil and gas industry? Probably wasn't huge, right? I mean, not super high macro level trends. And what SK has been doing is reading. I mean, how many articles did you say you read last night, SK? You told me you read like 92 or so. Right, I mean, right. SK just stays up all night and reads about cyber. And so he has a much broader view. Now that also means we have a more shallow view. So every company knows, okay, I don't know as much about all these cyber issues, but I know a lot about what's happening here. And so I think really what that lends itself to is a good synergy between universities and private companies, where universities, we have time to work on these problems because in business it's next problem, then the next problem, then the next problem, and I don't have time to sit and think about this one for a long time because I got another thing. And so that's where I think a lot of the crossover can happen between universities and business. Certainly there's things they know that we don't know. And also I think that there's patterns that we see that they may not be able to see because to them, they're right up here against the tree and they can't see the whole forest.
And also there is one company and we're looking across companies.
Exactly. Good point, Dale. Good point. Interesting. Very good. So I would like to ask a final comments from each one of you, and very interesting thoughts. SK, please, your final comments about cyber attacks.
Yeah. What I would say is, well, we are living the age of changes. Like COVID-19 is one of the big shocks in our lives, and even within the COVID-19 period, we see changes. So what I'm saying is cybersecurity is a big issue. Well, as far as I understand, it's a big issue. And within even cybersecurity issue, we see changes. The early COVID-19 period was totally different from now. So now the focus is again infrastructure. So what should we do? We should be really always be aware of what's changing and hear what's going on outside of our boundaries. That's the first step. At least let's do the first step and see what's next.
Yeah, Perfect. Thank you. Zach, please.
Yeah. So the first thing is, and this is to everybody who's watching, update your computer, update your software, make sure you have good password. The second thing I would say is that, and this kind of goes along with what SK was saying, it's continually changing, and it's difficult for companies to stay ahead of what attackers are doing. It's sort of like with the COVID right now. So you can't make a vaccine for a virus until you see what the virus is. And cybersecurity is very similar. You can't necessarily, you don't know exactly what the new attacks are going to be. So you can't really build, there's something called 0-day vulnerabilities, which is we open up a brand new system and there's already a vulnerability. There's no way we could have stopped it. And so it's again, similar to COVID where, okay, we don't have the vaccine. So just be as careful as possible, right? Whatever the equivalent of wearing masks and not touching your eyes and all that is, the same way we practice personal hygiene, we need to practice cyber hygiene within companies and the way that we relate to our suppliers and our workers. The last thing I would say in terms of where is this going, so what's the next step on the evolution? Dale mentioned a minute ago, there's all these smart objects, these IoT objects, and a lot of those have been compromised, but hackers haven't done anything with them yet. And so, and SK and I are reading about all these vulnerabilities that are building up and building up. And it's like these attackers have these big armies of smart devices that they're going to use at some point. And what they would use them for is the distributed denial of service, where they pick a server and they shoot a million requests at it until it folds, it goes down. These hackers have done this a lot of times to Microsoft and to banks and things like that. And so right now, hackers have more of these sort of smart objects than they've ever had before, and we don't know what they're going to do with them. And so if we think about, okay, what's coming next, it was, personal attacks, infrastructure, COVID emails. Next is going to be these big distributed denial of service attacks that they have all of the ammunition for, but they haven't actually started.
Yeah, perfect. Dale, your comments.
Honestly, Cavagna, I feel like a bit of a fraud here. 2 weeks ago, I got my Amazon and my Instagram and something else hacked because I was using the same password and I got locked out of all those things. So my old Instagram account, they still haven't let me back in. It's just sitting there. So I feel like a bit of a fraud talking about this. But we really are seeing more and more of our lives move online. Clearly this is a year where retail to a great extent is moving online. Zach and SK, actually I see SK at school sometimes, but most of the rest of the faculty and the PhD students are not there. And so more and more of our jobs are online as well. And you combine that with the number of linkages and the number of things, units and machines and everything that are on the internet. We're doing servers way differently than we used to. Instead of having your own server, you're using AWS and Microsoft Azure, and they tell us those are very secure, but they're secure until they're not secure. And so it's really an interesting time where so much of what we do is online, and really our whole power grid system is as well. And so it really makes sense for supply chain managers to be thinking about this a little bit. And I want to recommend Zach and Tom Choi, who is SK's dissertation chair, and come on, you may have met Tom before. Brilliant guy. Zach and Tom have an article on Harvard Business Review that really talks about vulnerabilities in the supply chain. If people go to hbr.org, and Zach could probably provide you a link to it if you
want. in the LinkedIn post, Zach, if you can add to the comments in the LinkedIn post. Very, very, very attractive, this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this conversation. Let me try to pronounce the name. Siagon John,
Even John.
SK.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, and sorry again.
Let me see if I can do it, SK, because I never do it either. Is it Song Yung Jung?
Yeah, perfect.
There we
Perfect. Thank you.
go.
Thank you a
So
lot.
I can talk like a karaoke and a Korean guy. That's perfect.
Yeah, very flexible. Yeah, interesting. Zach Rogers, thank you very much too. And Dale Rogers as ever. Thank you very much. Have a good day to
Talk to you.
all.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds
Thank
great.
you. Bye-bye.